I opened my business just over 7 years ago on the south side of Glasgow. That's how long I've known Anas Sarwar. My first week of opening, he actually brought his suits in to be dry cleaned. But I've always voted SNP. It was in my blood to vote SNP. It was built into me. My family always voted SNP, my mum, my dad, growing up. So you just went with the train, you know. But then as you got older and I've got grandkids, I want better for them. I'm voting Labour for the future of my children and my grandchildren, for the next generation basically, because Labour are going to make it better. I'm voting Labour because I trust Anas first and foremost, and he's a real person. He listens to what you've got to say, he answers, he finds out if you ask him something. If he doesn't know, he will find out for you. He's just a genuine good guy, a family man, and he cares. I'm delighted to introduce the leader of the Scottish Labour Party, Anas Sarwar.
Thank you, Joanne, for that very kind introduction. I want to speak directly today to my fellow Scots. Today, I'm not publishing a party manifesto. I'm publishing a recovery plan for our country. Because this isn't an ordinary type of election. It's a pandemic election. And too many of the other politicians and too many of the other politics and political parties want to take us back to the old arguments. Well, today I'm calling time on the old politics. This isn't a recovery plan for half the country. It is a recovery plan for all of Scotland. Because what people forget is this isn't an ordinary election. This is an election that comes at a time of national emergency. 10,000 of our fellow citizens have lost their lives. And my thoughts and condolences go out to all those families impacted. And with that, I say thank you to all those on the front line who have helped us get through this most difficult of years. But I don't want us to come through that collective trauma of COVID and go back to those old arguments. Yes, 10,000 lives lost, but this pandemic is not over. Lives and livelihoods are still at risk. And that's why we have to focus on that national recovery. 360,000 of our fellow citizens on furlough, worried about if and when they'll have a job to go back to. 7,000 undiagnosed cancers over the last year. That's not because cancer has disappeared. It's because people haven't come forward and they haven't had screening programs. That's 7,000 of our fellow citizens have cancer, don't know, haven't been diagnosed, haven't started their treatment, and therefore directly reducing their chances of survival. 1,500 of our children across this country are waiting over a year right now for their mental health treatment. And shockingly, over the course of this pandemic, 25,000 times someone has plucked up the courage, picked up the phone and called the crisis mental health helpline, and the call has gone unanswered. These failures have devastating consequences, just like the devastating consequences we saw of sending COVID-positive patients into care homes. And the reason why I mention those devastating consequences and give that context for this election is because if you were to follow the political arguments, if you were to follow the political bubble, you'd think that the only thing that matters right now is somehow those old arguments or those old debates. Well, I say to you directly, you deserve better politics, you deserve a better election campaign, you deserve a better government, and you deserve a better opposition. And I want to work with you, my fellow Scots, to build a better parliament so we can come through this crisis and build a stronger, fairer, more equal, more just, greener Scotland together. And that's why I want the focus, and this recovery plan's focus, is on a jobs recovery, an NHS recovery, an education recovery, a communities recovery, and a climate recovery. This isn't a manifesto. This is a route map back to stronger and better times for our country. And why does that matter? Our Scottish Parliament was created not as a chamber for politicians to go and get elected, take their seats and spend all their time arguing with each other and shouting at each other and not making progress for our nation. The Parliament was designed to encourage different political parties and different politicians with different outlooks to work together in the national interest. If now, in the midst of a pandemic, if now, at the time of a national crisis, if now, when 10,000 of our fellow citizens have lost their lives, if now, during a pandemic election, we can't put aside our old arguments and come together and work in the national interest, then when? When? And I say that directly to all other political parties. When? Let's change the way we do our politics. Imagine what we could achieve if we focused on what united us as a country, not what divided us. Imagine what we could achieve if we put aside those things that we disagree on and focused on the things we agree on. Imagine if we obsessed about education in the next Parliament. Imagine if we obsessed about the NHS in the next Parliament. Imagine if we obsessed about jobs and the economy in the next Parliament. Imagine we obsessed about eradicating child poverty in the next Parliament. Imagine we obsessed about challenging the climate emergency in the next Parliament. Just imagine the kind of Scotland we could build together. Just imagine what we could achieve, the best of devolution, the best of Scotland, and the best of the Scottish spirit. That's what the choice is in this election campaign. Who do you want to shape the future of our country? Do you want to put power, too much power, to one political party? And at the same time, do you want an opposition that only wants to play games and shout about division too? No. I think we can choose something different. I think we must choose something different. So I say directly to people, COVID didn't choose between yes, no, leave and remain. The aftermath is not going to choose between yes, no, leave and remain. And that's why I will work with anyone to rebuild the country we all love. This has been the most difficult year of our lifetime, where we have been separated from our loved ones like never before. But actually, we have come together as a country like never before too. So let's keep that spirit of hope and optimism coming through this pandemic. That spirit of empathy, unity and hope that we harnessed and we held on to help us come through this pandemic. And let's build on that spirit of hope, empathy and unity to work together in the national interest to rebuild the country that we all love. That's the choice. About this election, about politics, this election about political parties, or this election about you, your family, and our national recovery. And if you want this election to be about you, your family, our national recovery, if you want this election to be about getting people back to work, if you want this election to be about getting our NHS back on track, if you want this election to be about restoring our children's education, if you want this election to be about challenging the climate emergency head on, then you need to use both votes for Labour in this election. And let me explain why. If you use your purple paper to elect a constituency MSP that will be a Labour MSP, they will focus on what matters to you and your community. They won't be going to Parliament to fight with other politicians about the Constitution. They'll be going to Parliament to focus on this National Recovery Plan. And your second vote, your peach ballot, that's going to decide what the priorities of the next Parliament are going to be. What do you want those priorities to be? Do you want it to be politicians arguing amongst themselves? Do you want it to be politicians, both in the SNP and the Tories, who want to play up the division in our country for their own interest, not in the national interest? Every single political party in this election campaign is using the words national recovery. The difference between them and me is that national recovery isn't a political slogan. For me, it must be our collective national mission. And if you want to join that national mission, then you must use both your votes for Labour, and let's start that hard work of rebuilding our country together. In a moment, I'll be setting out more details of what is in our National Recovery Plan for Scotland. But before that, I want to talk to people who themselves have been impacted by this pandemic. And the first person that's going to join us today is Jill from Glasgow. And Jill, like me, has a young son, and Jill will have seen the impact that this crisis has had on children across the country. You can see it in their eyes. So, Jill, I'll let you speak for yourself in terms of the impact this has had on you and your own son, Charlie. What's the last year been like for you and young Charlie?
Well, for me, it's been very, very difficult. I'm a single mum working full time. Last year has been full of worry and concern, especially about my wee boy Charlie and his education and what his future holds for him. Not only the educational aspect, but the lack of socialisation, along with the mental, physical health implications of coronavirus, and the overwhelming anxiety and uncertainty of the future. It's been a tough time, I have to say.
It's been tough. It's been tough for families across the country. You can see that amongst our children. Why do you think an education comeback is so important? And why do you think we need an individual assessment for every pupil, not just an educational assessment, but also a mental health assessment? And what do you think we should be doing over the summer months so we've got young people and children raring to go after the summer holidays?
Well, for me, an educational assessment, as I've said, kids have been homeschooled for the last 12 months on and off with different parts of Scotland, different schools, even within different councils, getting different sort of access to education depending on what the school has to offer. And so for me, I think if you're able to sort of draw a baseline of where kids are, for them to have confidence in themselves, it's really important to have those individual assessments and sort of tutoring plans that are tailored specifically to what they want. In terms of mental health assessment, as I say, I think there's been an overwhelming anxiety across the nation, and that's filtered down to our kids. We don't know what's been going on and what's been happening and what the future holds. And so I think being able to assess that and see where they're sitting is a really important thing. Alongside that, we need to give kids the tools to try and succeed and to see their opportunities and their potential, to give them opportunities to socialise. I think that has to be a focus, immediate focus of the Parliament when they go back, is to focus on education and to spend the summer months rebuilding our children's confidence and the opportunities that lie ahead for them.
Thank you, Jill, and I hope when it's safe to do so, I finally get to meet you and your young boy, Charlie, at some point in Glasgow. Thank you for joining us. We're now going to be joined by Ross in Edinburgh. And Ross, you, like a whole generation of young people, may not have been impacted by the pandemic in terms of the death toll. But certainly around long COVID, along the impacts on your education, impact on your employability. It's been a tough year for you and your generation. Tell us a bit about the year you've had and some of the challenges.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely, as you said, maybe not so much health-wise, but young people have been really hammered, you know, economically, socially, as you touched on earlier, education. I've been quite fortunate that I've remained in employment during it. But even then, you're eating your dinner at the same table you just finished working on an hour before. You don't have any workplace camaraderie. You're trying to learn and progress in a job through Zoom, and it's just not the same. And a lot of my friends work in hospitality, and a lot of them basically haven't worked in a year. And that really impacts their confidence, their skill set. A lot of them are worried now about being left behind in the job market. You know, it impacts our mental health. They don't have the kind of like structure and sense of purpose that being in employment can provide.
Ross, how important do you think a jobs recovery plan and a jobs guarantee for young people, but also the long-term unemployed, alongside a new skills benefit, how important do you think that is for young people and other generations?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's massively important. And I think that really understands the scale of ambition that is required going forward. I mean, figures from the ONS have showed that 88% of jobs lost in the last year have been jobs belonging to the under 35s. You drill further into that, 63% of those jobs have been lost by the under 25s. So that really shows that the impact of the pandemic, you know, unemployment, it doesn't differentiate between whether you voted, you know, yes, no, leave or remain. It impacts us all. And that is why the Scottish Parliament, the next Scottish Parliament, has to be relentlessly focused on young people and that national recovery.
Thank you, Ross. I see the sun is shining in Edinburgh, so I hope you get a chance to go out and enjoy the sunshine safely, of course, through this pandemic. Make sure you do it safely. Thank you so much for joining us. We're now going to go to Iona, who's from Aberdeen. Iona, who's a passionate campaigner for climate justice. Iona, what's the last year been like for you and young people around where you live?
Yeah, so as a student, it has been very challenging trying to navigate remote learning and working together with my fellow students on group projects and the likes, just as everyone else has struggled with separating their work life and their home life because they're one and the same at the moment. And just like everyone else across the country, it has just been difficult being away from friends and family for so long. I think the last 12 months have shown us how important it is to work together to tackle this global pandemic. And it's even more important now that we work together to respond to the climate emergency that we're facing.
So we don't have time when it comes to the climate emergency. We can't afford to wait 5 years before we start the action. We need to do something emergency now. We've got 9 years to rescue our climate. What kind of things do you want to see in our climate recovery plan and the focus of the next Parliament?
I think mainly it's just a change in attitude and realizing that climate policy should be at the heart of all of our policies. Without a healthy planet to live on, none of the rest really matters. So yeah, a real focus on climate recovery at the heart of the rest of our policies is what I want to see.
Absolutely, and that's why we want to make sure there's a climate spokesperson that climate proofs every single one of our policies in the next Parliament, that we use the opportunity of COP26 in November, have the Glasgow Agreement, start taking seriously the international challenge of climate change. Iona, thank you so much. We're now going to go to Archie in Lanarkshire. Over to Archie. Get you to unmute yourself as well, Archie. Archie, tell us, what's the last year been like for you and your family?
Well, you know, I think you were right at the top of your launch to mention the fact that 10,000 people have died through this epidemic. We've been scarred by this. I know people who have died, unfortunately, and I know the sense of bereavement that has affected families. Now, anybody who thinks that we can go into an election without that influencing our thinking is living in cloud cuckoo land. This election is about the here and the now. This election, as that young lad has been talking about, is about where are our jobs going to come from. I have 2 grandchildren at university at the moment, and even they're worried about the next couple of years. Where are the job opportunities going to come for both the qualified like them or the less qualified like other children? So in that sense, we've been badly wounded. And if you don't mind me mentioning something personal that caught my eye in your recovery plan, and that's about cancer. 7 years ago, I had a serious cancer operation, brilliantly successful because of the superb efforts of the surgeons, and the NHS couldn't have been better and more helpful. And that was not only a success for me, but opened my eyes to how effective the NHS can be if it is properly run and properly subsidized. So in that sense, I think of the people who are now worried about their cancer and their cancer projections. They simply do not know when they'll be seen by the experts and the consultants. And in that sense, that's difficult. So I look at your initiative for catch-up and being able to get speedily seen cancer patients with more staff, more expert staff to help that out. That is absolutely essential, or else we're going to have another epidemic, and that is people dying as a result of COVID. So having seen that, and having come across people who have lost their jobs, for example, in my area, a lot of freelancers working in culture in general simply do not know if they're going to have an income in the next month, perhaps in the next year. It's as serious as that. So that's why your recovery plan is based not on rocket science. I mean, it's pure common sense. That's what attracts me to it. It's almost apolitical in the sense that you've looked at the problems, you've seen them, and you're articulating them in the right and proper way. So I look forward to helping you in this campaign.
Thank you, Archie. You mentioned so many important issues there. It's good to see you're fighting fit and recovered from cancer, but I know how important it is for you to get your regular screening. You've also mentioned the challenges that we face around our jobs, our economy. What do you think politicians should be obsessing about over the next 5 years? What do you want them in the Parliament obsessing about as we try and rebuild?
For jobs. There can be no future, no stability without jobs. We've got to ensure, as you refer in your plan for recovery, creating the number of jobs to get people back to work. You can't look at the future if you don't know where the money is coming in at the end of the month. So jobs, to me, jobs is at the core of everything. The young lady has talked about values. Yes, political parties must have values, but they must also be listened to. And I think what has happened to the Labour movement recently is that people just gave up on them. They decided not to listen to what was being said. That kind of legitimized their turning away from Labour and even just disregarding all the benefits that accrued from Labour governments. Now, I think that's grossly unfair, but it's a reality. And I admire the way that you're facing up to that. And now, and again, on another personal level, education. I started interest in politics as a headmaster of a school and as a school teacher and fought desperately for comprehensive education. That's not ancient history. It's with us at the moment, but it's still failing. The other
absolutely, but
opposition
claimed
that they would have a great success with it. It's been a failure under them.
And final question, Archie, because you look like and sound like someone that knows a bit about football. So I'm going to ask you about the European Super League and whether you back our proposals to end the cartel in football and to democratise football. Have you got a view on that as well, Archie?
Well, I always claimed, since I wrote a book about the man, that Jock Stein was the first man to say football is nothing without the fans. And I think that is essentially true. That's the principle upon which the game should be based. And I think the Labour movement has been famed through the years for taking up causes and pursuing them strongly. And in this sense, they should and help the fans democratise the game and give them more influence.
Thank you, Archie. And I noticed the subtle plug. Thank you, Archie. Thank you to Jill. Thank you to Ross. And thank you to Iona as well. I hope to catch up with you all in the near future when it's safe to do so. So what you've heard there is just some practical examples and practical real-life experience about the difference that a recovery plan would make. The reason why we should focus on pulling our country back together, not going back to those old divides, recognising the challenges that we faced over the last year and confronting them with big ideas, but also, as Archie said, with common sense. So what is that recovery plan? A jobs recovery, a guaranteed job for every young person and the long-term unemployed, a £500 skills benefit so people can learn new skills and go into the new economic environment, a £750 payment for the long-term unemployed so they can earn while they train, a work experience guarantee for young people, a new tax on Amazon so we can readdress the balance between online and high streets, reinvigorating the high streets, the £75 prepaid credit for every adult so they can go out there and spend in the high street, create new businesses and help create jobs. The Great Scottish Staycation, so we can rekindle our tourism industry, demonstrate that Scotland is open again and make sure our tourism industry goes from strength to strength. An NHS recovery, make sure we're catching up on those 7,000 missed diagnoses, ramping up and catching up on the missed screening programme, rapid diagnosis centres, mental health workers in every GP practice, a national care service, care, respect and human rights at its heart, and a proper pay increase for our NHS and social care staff. Making sure that we have £12 an hour as the starting rate for our social care staff, going up to £15 an hour by the end of the next Parliament. An education recovery, an individual assessment for every pupil across the country, not just of their educational attainment, but also of their mental health. Backing that up with 3,000 more teachers and 1,000 assisted support need teachers across the country. a device for every pupil across the country. That should have happened at the start of the pandemic, not be promised at the start of an election campaign. A reset guarantee for young people so we don't have a lost generation coming through this pandemic. And a summer comeback pass so our young people can spend the time with lockdown ending and those summer months to get access to sport, to cultural facilities and spend time with their friends, rekindle those friendships and rebuild their mental health so they're raring to go after the school holidays. A communities recovery, doubling the Scottish Child Payment so we can help end child poverty. A new disability payment so we can support families that have a family member with a disability who are disproportionately likely to live in poverty. A new housing agency so we can build 120,000 new socially rented homes across the country. And a climate recovery, meaning that we have an ambition for net zero by 2045, seeing that as a deadline, not the target that we need to aspire to by that point. Making sure every home across the country is at least energy efficient grade C by 2030. Investment in new green jobs for the future. A new conservation course so we can create 10,000 jobs for our young people across the country so they can help challenge the climate emergency and the nature emergency too. And a focus on COP26 in November so we can take that opportunity to show international leadership here in Scotland, but also recognise that climate change doesn't see borders and we've got to build international cooperation to once and for all challenge the climate emergency. And alongside that, rolling out free public transport for our young people and public transport in public hands. That's the offer in this election campaign. Big ideas and a reasonable plan to get our country back on track. That's the choice in this election campaign. A recovery plan that unites our country or going back to the old arguments, the settling of scores and egos. I think Scotland deserves better than that. And that's why in this election campaign, you need to use that choice and make that choice for the better future we have. We can choose something different. We don't have to go back to the old arguments. We don't have to go back to politicians arguing with each other. We can change our politics. And the reason why? COVID has changed the world. COVID has changed Scotland. And the idea that we shouldn't have to change our politics too, or change the way we behave with each other, is simply not acceptable. I want to change our politics. I didn't come into this to have more of the same. I'm not standing in this election campaign because I want to fight with other politicians. I'm standing in this campaign because I want to change the country I love. I know the Labour Party's got a lot of work to do to win back your trust. And I hope you've seen over the last 8 weeks that I've been in this position that I'm serious about the scale of that challenge, and I'm determined to give you and the people of this country the Labour Party you deserve, so we have the opportunity to serve the country that we love. That journey isn't over, but I need your help to complete the task. Complete the task of coming through this pandemic. Complete the task of delivering what devolution was meant to be all about, which is meant to be about working together in the national interest. That's the choice in this election campaign. Go back to those old arguments, go back to those divides, or choose something different. So on the 6th of May, use both of your votes for Labour. Use your first vote on the purple ballot to vote for a constituency MSP that's going to put you, your family and your local community and our national recovery first. But crucially, your second vote. That's going to decide what shapes the priorities of the next Parliament. That's going to decide whether it's Boris Johnson and Douglas Ross's Tories or it's us, the Labour Party, that are going to push our country towards the right priorities. That second vote's going to decide whether we have a Parliament that focuses on the old divisions or a Parliament that works for you. And my promise to you is this: if you vote Labour on the 6th of May, if you vote for Labour both in your constituency, but also crucially on that second vote too, I will work day and night, make sure we are implementing this national recovery plan. So when we come through this most difficult of years, do it as a more unified nation, but we also help through that unity build a kinder, greener, stronger, fairer nation that we need for our own families and for future generations. If you like what I'm saying, if you agree with what I'm saying, then please vote Labour 6th of May. Thank you.